So we're changing the upper and lower ball joints on the Dodge truck, the front Dana44. And this is the lower ball joint, and it's going to have a snap ring on the bottom after you've pressed that into place and locked that there. And it has just a lock nut on the top. This is the upper ball joint. It's going to be a little bit longer in here, and that's for this bushing that slides in there. That gets threaded into like the steering knuckle, and that'll be torqued down to spec in the final installation. It's got a castle nut, and it's gonna have a locking pin on there. Some new ball joints don't come with this bushing. This one didn't come with the new bushing, so I gotta reuse the old one here. I just got a simple ball joint kit. It's a C-clamp, driving rod, and I've selected the center ring here, and I've got it set up in the vise. And you want to put the bottom one in first because you got to get your driving rod in through there to install the bottom one. So originally, now I didn't have enough room to fit this spacer in yet, so I'm just using the plate, and I'm going to bring that down a little bit so I can get my space, and then this ring will go in there with that cap to give it its final seat. I like to use some anti-seize. You could get copper coat, you can get this stuff, or even lubricate it. You know, use some oil, use some WD-40. They're gonna help if you ever have to disassemble it. All of this stuff was hard to come apart, hard to press out here, hard to beat out of the steering knuckle here. So I would prefer using some anti-seize or some kind of lubricant to make that easier. The kit, the ring that came in the kit here was too large, so either you'd have to cut that down or find yourself another piece. I just found a piece of pipe to get in there and drive this down. Also too, the impact didn't have enough steam to get that down, so we just used the long bar and worked that down all the way. Once you got that driven down all the way, you want to put on your snap ring here, and then also too, I removed the grease nipple from the bottom for the installation, and now you can install that. I'd put maybe some blue thread locker on there, so that's not gonna work its way out. So the top one here is a little more tricky. This piece down here is on an angle. It's not true all the way around. So this spacer that I got in here, it was not in my original kit. I had to get it from another kit. And you'll turn this around. I believe this will be the high end right here, and the low end will be back in there, and you try and set that in there and straighten this up as much as you can. It's gonna kind of want to go in crooked, and it's the same as before. I had to finish off with the long bar there to get seated all the way to the end. And here's that piece there. Might be hard to tell, but it is higher on one end than it is the other. So you're gonna need, if you don't have one of these, you're gonna have to make something similar to fit in there and get that in. And then the other issue I'm debating is the grease nipple. Again, I removed for installation, but there's a grease nipple on the bottom, and the old one had a grease nipple on the side. And I guess we'll find out if that's going to interfere with our axle that comes in here. We'll see. We had a situation with our upper ball joint, and it had the grease nipple on the bottom, and that's going to interfere with our axle. So the original one had the grease nipple location on the side and not on the bottom there. And so I tried, I just made a center punch and drilled this out, and I just used a small drill bit for a pilot hole in there. And then I ended up using 7/32 drill bit, and drilled countersink that in there deep enough to accept our grease nipple. And then I tapped that out with tap. You can't read it on here, but it's metric 1.0, and that's close to 1/4 inch. So tap that out, and so we can put our grease nipple on the side now after we've installed it back to the way the original one is. And then I went and I got some plugs. So just some Allen head set screws, and I'll put that after I've installed this into the steering knuckle and greased it, and then I'll see the grease come out the end there. Then I'll put my plug in. I'll probably use some blue Loctite to make sure both of these don't come loose, don't come out. And when I was drilling that, what I was doing was I didn't want to, well, try not to get any shavings inside there. So I had some compressed air in there, just lightly, with some light compressed air, so it's not going to blow the boot off, and help blow the shavings out as you're drilling and tapping that. Also too, my U-joints that I got, they didn't have any grease points on there, so I attempted to, this is the old one, it had it in the center, and it also had a plug in for the end cap. So I did the same thing. I center punched that and drilled it out and tapped it out, and I put my nipple on there, and then I tried the same thing on the new one, but it won't go. I don't know if you can see, barely see, it didn't even hardly make a scratch in there because this is so hard. So I guess the indication is when you're using your center punch to punch your hole and it blunts the center punch, then it's too hard to drill. It's not going to happen for you. So, but in the case of our upper ball joint, I was able to make a mark, and that let me know that I was going to be able to drill a hole in this and put a grease nipple in there. So yeah, save you guys some trouble of if you don't buy the right part. Make sure if you buy the right part you won't have this issue, but if you run into this problem, that was my fix. On the driver's side, we've got this steering arm that goes on here, and then we've got like these little wedge bushings. So those wedge bushings will go in there, and then we're going to torque these down. These are 1/2 inch studs. So my spec sheet says 85 foot-pounds for 1/2 inch fine thread, and that's what we'll go with. For our upper ball joint tapered bushing, I didn't have the tool for that, so I just built one. I cut the top of the upper bushing ball joint off for the bushing to slide on there, and then I just took a 3/4 socket, and I just took some 1/4 inch key stock, and I placed the key stock in there, and then I just tacked those on the outside and on the inside. And then when I was done, just take the angle grinder and finish it off if you can, and grind it up nice and smooth. And that's my tool for torquing that down when we get to that point there. We start off, going to put some anti-seize in the top and the bottom there. We're going to throw our tapered bushing in just to get it started, and then we're going to install our steering knuckle with the new upper and lower ball joints. So get our steering knuckle all lined up here. We're just going to slide that into place, and then we're going to put on the bottom nut there to hold it. I'm referencing the Haynes manual, and it's telling us that we want that lower ball joint at 80, and then that taper sleeve bushing at 40, and then the upper ball joint at 100. So we come over and we want to put the bottom ball joint in first and tighten down that nut, and I got an 1 1/8" socket, and that's a lock nut on there. So you torque that down. That's gonna drive this thing up and seat it, and then we can move to the top, and this is where our tool comes in, and we're going to torque that down to spec, and that's going to drive that tapered bushing down and lock in this upper ball joint. And once we've done that, then we want to tighten our top nut on the upper ball joint there. So the issue that I had was, this is the nut that came with the new ball joint, and as you can see, it barely contacts the steering knuckle here. So if I'm going to use this, I'm going to need to get a good washer in there in between. But the old one is quite a bit larger by comparison. So I'm gonna use the old one, and I've decided that I'll use a lock washer too. I found this lock washer that fits on there really nice, and so we'll put that down. We'll torque it to spec, and that one is a 1 5/16" socket. And once we get that torque down to spec, we're going to move the castle nut till it lines up with one of the holes there and throw our lock pin in place. Now that we got the steering knuckle installed, we're ready for the axle shaft. And so the axle shaft here will have a series of seals. This is the large one. It'll go on here, and then we got like this nylon disc. It'll go there. And then we got another little rubber seal that'll go on the outside of the nylon disc, and all of that is going to seal the bearing inside of the spindle that goes on over top, and then this is going to get bolted to the steering knuckle there. We put in some new U-joints. These U-joints didn't come with any grease point in there, so what I tried to do was, the old one had a grease point here which you're not going to be able to access to grease it, and it had a plug on the end. So what I did was I just used the old one here, and I drilled and tapped, put a greaser on the head, on the end here, the cap. And I practiced on the old one, and I was going to repeat the process on this new one here, but that wasn't going to happen. This cap is so hard that it blunted my chisel, and maybe that's the spot that I tried to get it, and so it's too hard. It's not going to drill and tap to put a grease zerk in there. So These are sealed units. Won't be able to grease them. So we've put our axle shaft in there. You just slide it down in, turn it until it makes contact and slides in all the way. I just have the end resting the metal dust shield in the back here, so it's not sitting on the sleeve on that seal there. And then once you've got that installed, then you're going to grease up your bearing, your spindle bearing there, and you're going to install your spindle, and then once you've got the spindle on, then you're going to put that dust shield on there. You're going to torque this down to spec. We've got our spindle and our dust shield bolted on here. I think these are 3/8 fine thread. Should be about 35 foot-pounds. Torque those down. And now's a good time to maybe get a good look at this. This is going to be inside the hub portion. And once we've put our rotor on with our bearings, we're going to follow the instructions. We're going to torque this down to put the preload on our bearings. And then it's got our lock ring here. There's a little tab, little pin there, and you'll tighten that just enough to get it into the next hole for the locking ring. And it's got a tab in here, so that's what's holding it there. It's got its tab there holding it there. Then we've got our final lock nut, and then we're going to torque that down, and it's flat on both sides. It's gonna sandwich this in there. It's gonna tighten it all up, and then that's gonna keep it from coming loose. When you disassemble this will be the tight one. Then you remove the lock nut, and this one usually you could almost get it by hand once it's set properly. Next we want to put on the rotor, and I didn't change bearings or seals in this, but you can change your bearings and seals. This is the rear seal and the inner bearing. You grease it up, and slide it over the spindle, and then you're going to have your other bearing greased up, and you're going to slide that in place, and then you're going to install those lock nuts. With our rotor put on there, we're going to want to get our outer bearing, and we're going to grease this bearing, and then we're going to install it. And after the bearing's installed, then we're going to install our series of lock nuts and washers, with the lock nut with the pin on it first. And I didn't have the tool for this job, so I built one. I just got a piece of pipe, and I used some 1/4-inch key stock, and I just welded those on there. And put that on there to snug that in. And then we want our lock washer, and then we're going to go with our final nut for the torque. So the instructions are saying to torque this down to 50 foot-pounds, rotate it, back it off, retighten it again, 30 to 40 foot-pounds, and then as you're rotating the rotor, back it off 135 degrees. Once you're satisfied with that, that's when you'll install your lock ring in there, and then you're going to tighten the last lock nut down to 50 foot-pounds. That's going to hold it all together. So we've got the preload on the bearings, and we torqued that down to 50, backed it off, we torqued it down again to 40, and as we were backing it off the second time, we were rotating the rotor, and we backed it off 135 degrees, and then we locked the final lock nut on at 50 foot-pounds. So next is to install our locking hub. So we'll slide that in there, line it up, and slide that in. And once we've got that slid in there, we have our snap ring that's going to go on in the groove here, and we also have our other lock ring that's going to go in this groove in the hub. So it's going to lock our hub into place, and then we put the cap on, and we'll bolt that on there. And I think we want to be gentle because these are pretty small screws, and quite a few of them broke when we took it apart. And we've also got our O-ring on here to seal the inside so we don't get any mud or water or anything in there. We finished putting on that locking hub, and that's free. And as you can see while you're spinning it, we don't have the pinion spinning on the differential there. So we lock it, and now it's locked. It's going to be a little more to turn it, and now we have our pinion spinning, so everything's working the way it's supposed to. Next is going to be this brake caliper bracket, and that's going to bolt on in behind here, and these two bolts are about 1/2 inch, so I'm pretty confident that that can be torqued down to 60 or 75 foot-pounds. Next we got the brake caliper. Install that, and that will be held on with these little keeper tabs, one on the bottom, one on the top, and that's just a 1/2 inch socket on there, so we'll just snug those down, and that's as far as we're going with this. Also too is the track bar that gets installed here, but we've got some steering work to do, so that'll be done with that job.